Hello, Cheri. How are you this morning?
I'm good, Richard. How are you today?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We are joined by Cheri Mason of Catalyst Leadership Management. I got that right, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Wonderful. And as we were talking before we went live, you're joining us from our nation's capital today because you're going to be speaking a little later this afternoon.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to be speaking at the National Association of State Workforce Agencies this afternoon. But the byproduct of that is I do get to see our youngest son. So
Oh,
I
nice.
crash at his apartment. This is not his apartment behind me, but
I would say very impressed if he had that much physical space in DC.
no, this is very similar to our house in North Carolina. Not exactly, but very similar.
That's great. And is he a student there or working there or?
No, he's a golf pro here in the
Oh,
area.
cool. So he's
Mhm.
working. Excellent.
He's working.
Oh, very nice. Oh, that's great. Are you a golfer yourself? Or did you leave that to him?
I am. I'm not quite as good as he is. I'm hoping to get back into the game a little bit more these days, but I haven't quite dug in yet.
I played yesterday afternoon with my brother-in-law, and I was in a rush because I had a bunch of meetings, and then the meetings ended, and then he was like, "Hey, I'm 5 minutes away from picking you up," and I'm like, "Okay, great." And I ran out the door, and I forgot my golf shoes, so I had to
Oh,
play the round in just like regular tennis shoes, and yeah, it's just not the same. I know it sounds like sort of a fussy thing, but it was not the same at
it's
all.
not. No, those
Yeah.
golf shoes make a difference. They
They
do.
really do when you're
Mhm.
trying to, dig in and have a good swing and you're slipping out of your swing and all that stuff. So
Yep.
so I didn't play well and I'm entirely blaming it on the shoes.
I think that sounds good.
Cheri, I would love to you have such a rich and such a diverse background and this kind of road you've traveled to where you are today as the founder and CEO of your own sort of leadership management company, and you're a published author. But you have a very, rich background, as I mentioned. When you and I did our pre-call, I was gazing at all of the citations on the wall behind you and all these things. So would you just do us the favor of a little bio sketch, Cheri, of where you started and the majority of your career?
Sure, I'm happy to. So, I actually started in Appalachia. I was born and raised in Southern Ohio, Portsmouth, Ohio.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's where I started. I lost my father to a suicide, and he was a World War II Navy veteran, and I was a
Mm,
very young child. And
yeah.
so that really impacted a lot of
Yeah.
my childhood.
Sure.
Just because Appalachian people just they don't, people in general don't like things they don't understand.
Right.
And that was something people didn't understand. I had a very strong mother who was a government teacher,
Mm,
and so she refused to allow me to hide in the background and pushed me out and made me do things and told me I could do and be whatever I wanted. And
yeah.
so then I went to college and got my degree in political science and psychology
Oh, wow.
and was headed to law school. And I met and married an Air Force officer. um, and we actually are our college sweethearts. And I was clueless about military lifestyle, and so
Yeah.
I literally went from the frying pan of a Appalachian girl
Right.
into the fire of a military
A
spouse.
military spouse. Yeah.
And at that time, you weren't supposed to have a job. You were supposed to have
Mm,
a career. You were supposed to support your military husband in the base. And,
mm.
I was already doing it wrong. I was in law school, so
Right. Right. Yeah. Like, what's
I
wrong?
I persevered. They call it trailblazing now. I don't know. But I had a unique career. Like, I didn't have a traditional career ladder.
Right.
Mine looked more like an expedition. I did private practice as attorney. I did government practice. I was a executive assistant secretary. I was a teacher at a college overseas. I also ran
Wow.
like I was, I ran their program, paralegal program. And then I came back to DC and
Mm,
ended up back at VA where I
mm.
had started. And it was really a good fit. I really, at the Board of Veterans Appeals, sees across the department,
Yeah.
really used my psychology degree and my law degree. And, the work was impactful. I felt like I made a difference. But things happened along the way. There were
Right.
things I saw, experiences I had, and various leaders I worked for that I learned lessons from. And so then, as I continued that track, and we had a couple of children along the way, one day the White House called and asked me if I would consider being chairman of the board,
Yep.
which was the organization I worked for. And I said, yes, but understand that I'm going to lead just like I lead right now, people first.
Right.
And the response I got was, that's why we're calling you.
Yes.
Um, so I did. I stepped into the role after Senate confirmation, which was an experience,
I bet.
and became the chairman. I served as the chairman for 5 years,
Wow.
from 17 to 22. And in that time, the organization thrived. We turned things around. We brought in technology innovation. And then I retired in early 23 and didn't know what I wanted to do. And everybody's like, you got to write a book about what you did because
how you experienced.
it's not typical.
Right.
And so I did. And then I've also launched my speaking career from that. I spoke a lot in my job as chairman. I enjoyed it. I think it's helpful and impactful to people, but I wanted to broaden that from based on the book, but also, what I see out there, there's a gap between employees and employers, and the workplace is constantly evolving and changing, and we have to evolve and change right along with it.
Before we go any further, Cheri, for the folks listening that maybe don't understand as much clearly as you do about the military and Veterans Administration, can you talk just a little bit about what Veterans Appeals does? Like, what's their core mission?
Yes, absolutely. So the board is the secretary's designee to decide all appeals from the department. So they're like the final decider, but beyond us, it goes to a court.
Okay.
And so what happens is veterans ask, they apply for disability ratings based on things that happened in service, or they're looking for certain services for healthcare purposes.
Okay.
Those are primarily the two cases we see. And actually the disability pieces can be gateways to healthcare services. So they're extremely important.
Sure.
And so what would happen is if a veteran is not awarded the benefits that they are seeking for various reasons, they can appeal to the Board of Veterans Appeals. That's where the lawyers, all the judges and attorneys sit. Primarily, there's some attorneys and general counsel, but the Board of Veterans Appeals is really focused on looking at the evidence, looking at everything, looking at the service, the medical evidence, the lay evidence, everything, and really seeing if we can get to yes and decide those cases so that veterans and their families get the benefits they earned and then can get the services they earned.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. I mean, my dad does, he is a disabled veteran himself from the U.S. Navy, and he was able to receive benefits without going through an appeals process. So that was very good. I have to wonder, Cheri, you said, I said it so nonchalant. I got a call from the White House that basically asked if I would be the chairman of the board of Veterans Appeals. That call comes in. I mean, what are you thinking?
Well, it was interesting because, I'd been a senior executive at the board, and I had worked with the previous administration on some things around what we were doing to change laws and some other things. So there was awareness at the senior level of who I was. I was like the number 2 senior executive in the agency, in the board at that time. And what I didn't know at the time, a couple of different things happened. So I, lived in Washington, D.C. You go to church with all different sorts of people. You run into all different. I happened to go to church for a while with the Pences.
Okay.
And so, Mike and Karen, we knew them through various things at church. And Mike happened to remember that I worked at the VA.
Wow.
Didn't know exactly what I did, but he knew.
But he knew that. Yeah. He knew who you were, which is pretty impressive.
And
I think of the amount of people that he interacts with on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, and I had worked previously many, many years ago for a congressman when I first entered the world of political science. I'd worked for a congressman on the Hill from my home state of Ohio. And what I didn't know, we still have a very good relationship. I'm very good friends with he and his wife.
Okay.
He and his wife were sponsors of the Pences when they came to Congress.
Okay.
So you know how these things
So
fit
these these
together.
these things get very circular. Yeah,
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 so
yeah.
that was kind of happening. Well, also because I had worked in the administration and done some things, the outgoing administration, which was Secretary Bob
Mhm.
and and Deputy Secretary Gibson, had recommended they make, when you're in transition, they
Yeah,
make
they make recommendations for who to come in for the next administration, right?
right. And the
Mhm.
chairman position had not been filled for 7 years. And
Wow.
it showed.
Yeah,
And we were approaching a lot of different challenges in front
I
of
bet.
us, and there were significant concerns. And so Secretary Bob and Deputy Secretary Gibson put my name forward to the transition team,
Mm,
which I didn't find out about till later after I got the
right.
call from the White House. But
Mhm.
the initial call came initially from Vice President Pence.
Mm. Wow.
Um, yeah. So
And I know it sounds you had a relationship with him, so to you it probably was not all that,
it was
odd
a
to
little surreal. I mean,
yeah,
he
yeah.
was the vice president by
At
then,
the
and
time, yeah,
so
exactly. He wasn't just a gentleman that you see in the
right.
congregation on Sunday. At this point, he's, the second highest,
Right.
executive
Yeah.
officer in the
When the
country.
call, when the call came in, you have the phones that read your,
Yeah.
even in the office,
Caller ID. Yeah.
where they're coming from, the caller ID, and it was not really clear. And so, but I
Yeah, it's gotta be
answered,
secure, right? He's gonna be calling
right.
you from some
And I
secure line.
answered, and somebody said, please, please hold for
Please
the
hold.
vice president. And I went,
Okay.
okay. Yeah. So, and
Regardless of whether or not you're ready to have that conversation, you're having it. Yeah.
that's right. And
Yeah.
Bob McEwen, who was the mutual friend, called me actually later that evening, and he was calling to tell me that call was going to happen, and I said, yeah, it happened
Yeah.
today.
Dollar late, friend.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where, you know, I was in the right place at the right
Yeah,
time.
sure.
I had the ability to make an impact, and that's what you want to do.
Well, it sounds like you're being a little modest there too, Cheri, where you say you were in the right place at the right time. Clearly, you were extremely well qualified for this position as well.
Yes, I was well qualified for the job. I mean, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be a judge.
And you
There's
had all
things.
this you had all this human services background too, right? I
Yeah,
mean, yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was familiar with the Hill.
Mhm.
I had been working on the Hill quite a bit,
Mm.
with the legislation we were working on, as well as I had a reputation with the veteran service organizations, and so
Yeah.
I was a known quantity. And I think that was the other thing, rather than bring in someone for that position, because it's the board chairman job of many of political positions in many organizations. It is a hands-on
Yeah.
leadership
Sure.
engagement job. You're managing 1,200 people, but you're also
Wow.
deciding appeals for over
I
200,000
was gonna say
veterans.
hundreds of thousands
Hmm.
of vets, right? Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
You mentioned something, when when you got the call and you went through confirmation and you said, "I'm gonna lead people first,"
right.
right? And I've worked a little bit in my career for the state, so I understand sometimes how bureaucracy is and sometimes how management is at the state level. I've never worked at the federal level like yourself. And obviously, you as an entrepreneur now, since your retirement, you have launched Catalyst Leadership. Talk to me a little bit about what you meant when you said leading people first, Cheri.
So, over the years, one of the things I learned from my experiences as a suicide loss survivor, as well as a military spouse, is the importance and impact of people and relationships with them.
Mm,
And those are things that we often overlook in the work world. And
mhm.
so often when you step into leadership positions, or you're being trained or groomed for a leadership position, one of the things people will tell you over and over again is you have to drive for results. You have to look for the low hanging fruit. You have to, it's about results, results, results. And actually this goes back over 150 years, back to the Industrial Revolution, because when things started changing with machines and things like
Mm.
that, people suddenly felt that results were more important than employees,
The person, sure.
than people. And
Mm.
so I chose to do it differently. I'm like, look, the results are important, but you can't run over people to get them. And so they're kind of important. And so
Yeah,
what I really felt was that there's a secret ingredient
yeah.
here, and that's understanding that employees are people and that they're
Hmm.
human beings
Hmm.
and that they have lives
Hmm.
outside of work.
Hmm.
And you treat them like they are people and human beings. And when that happens, and you treat them like the most valuable resource your organization has, because that's what they are,
Right.
um, then the results happen.
Mm.
And I had seen that. I had worked for leaders who didn't do that. I had worked for some who had,
Sure.
and in my own leadership, you know, ladder climbing, that's how I led. I
Mm.
invested in my people, I cared for my people, and the results followed. And so I was very clear that that's, the organization when I took over had done the most we'd done was 55,000 decisions for veterans. We had about 800 people. Morale was in the tank.
I bet.
It was rough.
We didn't have like you said, there was no chairman for 7 years, right?
Yeah, we had four different leaders who were
Mm.
primarily caretakers, and there really hadn't been any investment in the organization.
Right.
And
Certainly
what
not
I
people,
what
right?
I what I say in the book is, the ship was off course,
Mm.
and the seas were pretty rough, and there were
Right.
some storms on the horizon. And so, but the secret to that was the crew. The ship was sound because the crew was sound. Like
Sure.
you have to take care of
They
your
were
crew.
keeping it afloat, but it was off course, right?
That's right. And
Yeah.
so, because they didn't have any direction or
Right.
leadership, and
And that's
so
not their fault. Yeah.
it's not. And
Yeah.
so that's what I did, is people first, and that's still how I think, and I think that's really the key to the tag for my book, is um, relating with your people can be like jet fuel for your organization.
Right. Right. Let's talk a little bit about Dare to Relate. You mentioned, right, that people first, this notion of treat humans, treat people like people. I'm with you. I believe the most precious resource of any organization is its human capital, right? Not its products, not its real estate, not its shareholders, it's its people, right?
Mhm.
That is a concept that didn't exist. You and I are contemporaries. That concept didn't exist years ago. It was company first, right? I don't know. I'm not a military veteran, so I don't know what it's like in the military. But I'm going to assume there's not a lot of people first there. Um, how did you bring all of that together into Dare to Relate? I guess, Cheri, and sort of the experiences that you saw across your career.
Yeah. So actually, the military actually in some cases does a better job at people first than
Really? Yeah.
than the civilian world, especially
Mm.
the Marines. The Marines
Mm.
are very focused on their people. Um, but really, what I saw was what I told the story of is where it was based from what I
Mm.
learned from my baseline,
Sure.
and then taking that into stepping into just being an employee and
Mm.
being someone who experienced leadership. And I was frustrated because I felt, if leaders would just, talk to us like
Right.
we were people, instead of pushing for results all the time and cracking the whip or dangling the carrots, they could get, it's always the old saying, you catch more flies with honey, right?
Sure. Sure.
It's That's really what it came down to. And so that's really why I wrote the book, because what I saw over the years, you're right, is we went through a period really starting, it's kind of been up and down, but it really started in the 80s with some driving change. And like I said, it really goes back to the Industrial Revolution, and it's
Absolutely.
been
Sure.
on
All the way back to, yeah.
up and down, in and out. And occasionally you'll have, bright spots that appear. And
Mhm.
most large organizations will ignore it until it hits them right in the face. And, that's kind of what happened with employee engagement.
Yeah.
Google and Amazon and all those companies started and they were doing things differently. And then, they started studying it because all of a sudden employees wanted that, right?
Yeah.
But then we did that, but we still didn't do it. We just measured it and we just talked it. We didn't really do it.
Right.
And then 2020 happened.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, the changes in the workplace are the result of 2020. I don't necessarily believe they're a
I think
result
it's
of
building
2020.
long before then. I'm with you.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But it did add fuel to that fire.
Sure. Absolutely. Yes.
And what it showed people, again, for many employees and some leaders, was that, life's more important than work. It's
Sure.
part of it, but shouldn't be
It's
the
not
driving
all of it.
force.
Yeah.
And so it kind of brought that back
Mm.
into being. And I think that's kind of why we're in turmoil today, because we're trying
Mm.
to figure out what the new quote unquote normal is and how to do that. And if we think about that we're dealing with people, that we're all people, we all want to matter. We all
Hmm.
want to be valued and respected. That's what it comes down to.
Sure.
So, let's think about how we do it from that point of view. And
Mm.
that's really why I wrote the book, because
Hmm.
as a developing leader, you're not taught these things,
No.
right? I don't People say to me, "You don't have an MBA." And I said,
Mm.
"No, I don't have an MBA." And I said, "I'm probably better for it
Right.
because I have the experience of knowing what worked and stepping into those roles." Now, I
Hmm.
read a lot. But I learned from all those. I had great mentors. I had
Yeah.
mentors that showed me things that probably shouldn't be, that way, and you learn. And so that's really what it's about, because I think this country can be much more successful if we start realizing that, you take care of your people and you focus on your people as human beings. And, I actually personally believe that military spouses, veterans, and military dependents can help with that,
Yeah.
because in many cases they understand change and adapt to change and understand the importance and impact of people much more
Sure.
than others do.
What's running through my head right now is the leaders eat last statement.
Mhm.
You've heard
Yep.
that, right?
Mhm.
As you're describing that, and the people first, and I'm thinking about, leaders eat last because they are making sure that their people are taken care of
Mhm.
before they are taken care of, right? And
That's right.
I do believe Simon Sinek did take that from the U.S. military as his.
I think he did. Yeah, I like Simon's work. He's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
I've lived through my career with a couple of organizations where, we've certainly had challenges in our emerging leaders, right? So whether they're the young leaders, the young managers, the extended leadership team, and organizations I've been at have said, "Oh, this our junior management layer, our emerging leadership layer, it's so weak. It's not it's." And I never saw the investment though, Cheri, right? To improve
Mhm.
those. What I saw was we need to replace them, right?
Mhm.
Do you talk about that sort of in Dare to Relate, or as part of what you do with Catalyst Leadership?
I don't think I cover. I mean, I talk about it a little bit in the book, but one of the things we're seeing, and I've written some articles about this and commented, been quoted in some articles about this, is that almost 40%, in the high 30s of employees don't want to step into leadership roles.
Right. They want to stay contributors. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, because they don't want to turn into what they believe leaders are, because
Right.
what they see as leaders is not who they want to be.
Yeah. Right.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem, one. But two, the other part of that is, how do you develop these young leaders? Like I said, I have two sons. One's 29, one's 24.
Hmm.
And, so I have a millennial and a Gen Z. The millennial is starting to step into some early leadership roles, right?
Hmm.
Because the company's asking him to do that here
Oh
and
yeah.
there.
Yeah. And he's at that age, and right, and
And
experience
he
level.
is, and
Yep.
he can do it. He can see it. I mean, he's a military dependent. He's got
Mhm.
he's got some skills that he's realizing that he has, and the company sees them. But he's challenged with leading, how kind of taking on the role in the way that he thinks the role should be
Should be.
versus the
Yep. How it
company.
is. Yep.
Right. And so that's the struggle. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I'm talking about today at this conference is, everybody wants to find the ideal candidate, right?
Mhm.
Well, the ideal candidate in their head is the ideal candidate of the past.
Right.
And that candidate pretty much doesn't exist anymore, right? So they've got to, again, evolve and figure out, how do you find and grow
Mhm.
the right candidates into what you want.
Mm.
And again, it's an investment, it's a support mechanism. And this is one of the areas that people are struggling over, again, is, you know there was a time early in the 2000s that we saw a lot of perks being
Mhm.
offered.
Yes.
And if you talk to any of the entry level employees and even people transitioning out of the military, they don't talk about perks. They want a competitive salary, a
Mhm.
competitive salary, right?
Mhm.
But that's not even their first thing. They want to find a culture where they fit.
Mm.
They want, and this is regardless of whether they're military or new graduates, because I talk to college students as well. And they want to find a place where they can fit. Will they be accepted? Will they be valued? Will they be
Right.
respected? That cares about them for their well being, that acknowledges their work, allows them to impact in
Mhm.
some short shape or form, and matches with their values.
Makes
And
sense.
then they get to salary.
Sure, sure. It's funny, you mentioned about the perks, and I can remember when I was general management level role in 2017, 2018, 2019, and it was all about, well, we're going to feed you, we're going to provide you breakfast and lunch, and the workplace is fun because it has like gaming tables and it's, cool and to your point, like people were happy for that, but it really, I don't think at all made them more fulfilled in their job,
No,
right? And made them feel, and I feel like to your point, yes, the pandemic changed our working environments in the sense that, a lot of us don't go into offices anymore, but the idea of those kinds of perks are just not important to the incoming workforce now, right? They're like,
right,
I don't care if you have gaming tables or you're going to feed me lunch. I want, like you said, I want a competitive salary and I want a culture where I feel like I belong.
right.
And I know so many young folks, my daughter included, who's 22, are
Mhm,
looking to be part of something bigger than
mhm.
themselves,
Yep,
right? That's really important to her. It's
yep.
not just, I'm working for XYZ company, right?
Right. It's fascinating to me because, being a tail end of the boomer group and, wagging that dog, um, we kind of learned throughout, even though my career was vastly different than most, we did kind of learn and accept along the way. Yeah, you find a job, you find the right place, you
Right.
stay, you
Hey,
work,
settle in and do your 30
right, you
years
settle
and
in, and then you
yeah,
have your time, and then, then you go out and do what you want.
right.
Right. And the newer generations,
Hmm.
because I don't think it's just the Gen Zs and the
Yeah.
millennials.
Yeah, probably both,
I
right?
I
For sure.
think I think it's both. I think it's a little bit of the next gens as well. I mean, I think
Mm.
there's a mixture in there.
Sure.
They um they get this concept of impact
Right.
more. They
Right.
they want that from the beginning.
Yes.
And that's really important to them. And
Mm.
for me, I think that's the biggest change that employers are focused or are faced with, is how do they allow and focus employees to do that in the area that they're bringing in new employees to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Sherry. Tell me a little bit about the types of organizations that, Catalyst Leadership Management works with, the types of organizations you want to work with. Kind of what's the ideal profile for you, Sherry, to step into?
So I do consulting, and my consulting ranges from, my career at VA, and you know how VA works and things like that. So I do some consulting in that area because the boards looked across the agency, so my understanding of how the department worked and things like that is important to people. So I do some consulting on that. I also do consulting on leadership development and training. And I do
Okay,
that with
great.
smaller companies, not usually one on one, but usually like in a team environment, whether it's
Yeah.
speaking to a group or being part of their training initiative, coming into conferences. One of the things I'm working to build is really building out my speaking
Mm.
engagements where I'm speaking at associations and conferences
Like today, for
on,
example.
like today,
Yeah.
on this topic, and providing training and information along these lines, because I think the more we talk about it, the more
Mm.
people can understand what it is, because every leader is different, that we're not all the same. So not everybody's going to be hands-on engaged. um, but there's things you can do to be more present and relating with your workforce. And it's, there's different approaches you can take. I mean,
Mhm.
whether you have, four people or thousands, and it's different in the virtual world than it is in person,
Sure.
and building teams around that is important. And then again, how you
Mm.
develop your aspiring leaders. So I talk to students, both in universities and colleges. I've been brought in to speak to like leadership classes.
Oh, great.
So I do some work there, and then I do some work with, again, conferences. Then small and large corporations asking me to talk to their leadership. Sometimes it's executive teams, sometimes it's management, development teams. Sometimes it's their human resources people. Um, you know, so a
Do you
little
do
little bit of
work with SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management at
no, but
all?
I aspire to.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about, I can't believe where we sit. It's August. You know, 8 months have passed. We're coming into a very, very crazy fall, it looks like.
Mhm.
What are some of your what are some of your personal goals and your professional goals, Cheri, as you look to kind of the end of this year? Believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying that out loud, but here we go, right?
Well, I already have several speaking engagements booked for September and October,
Hmm.
and gonna give my internet a minute to catch up.
Yeah, it's
And
okay.
then I do have some bookings already in early 2025
Oh,
for
wow.
some speaking.
Wonderful.
So I'm hoping to continue and build that out.
Hmm.
I'm working on expanding my website a little bit, getting more information on there, getting
Hmm.
getting information out, and then really just building, building awareness out there. I'm writing several articles, who on a variety of different things, usually around this topic of leaders and employment, and how we can approach it differently.
Hmm.
I've I've written several articles on online articles. I write an article, quarterly article for Hotel Executive. Um, so I've been asked, to do that, brought on to write those. So I'm doing a lot there.
Yeah, you're
You know,
transcending across multiple industries. This is
yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm trying
yeah,
trying
that's
to,
great. Yeah. That's
because
all
I
you can
really,
do is try. Yeah,
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 I think this message resonates. I mean,
yeah.
from new students to transitioning service personnel, to leaders in whatever capacity, whether
Mm,
they're aspiring or whether they're, already in the C-suite.
mm.
There's just a lot of different ways to think about it. So I do speaking as well for veteran and military organizations, and I do some training there specifically around transition,
Mhm.
because that's an area that,
Sure.
it's interesting that it's aligned so much with our current civilian employment. I
Right.
don't think people realize how much their similarities are there, and
Mm.
so I do some work there. So I've kind of got a lot of irons in the fire. So I'm just seeing which one catches and goes. But I enjoy speaking. I enjoy engaging with people, and I found that I have a couple of little, bits that I do in my speaking that kind of gain people's attention. I
Yeah,
do talk
yeah.
about the secret ingredient, but there may or may not be a mask and a cloak involved in some of my speaking.
Yes, yes, you told me about that. That's exciting. I appreciate the fact that you're really, as a true entrepreneur, Cheri, you are experimenting through a bunch of different channels right now, right?
Yeah,
And then you're going to find the channels that resonate, and you're going to go deep into them, right? And that's
yeah.
that's going to be really exciting when that happens.
Yeah, I found in entrepreneurship, I'm pretty new to it, so
Right.
I'm learning, and I learn from others, so I'm always open to advice and guidance and suggestions and references, and so I think, as you go in any business, you figure out where you fit and what you bring value and impact to. And for me, that's my core message from Catalyst is I built Catalyst to on the foundation of who I was as a military spouse and a survivor, that it, for me in my life, it's always been about purpose, impact, and value. And so
Yeah,
that's what I bring.
truly. Well, and I appreciate that because look, you had a very nice career, right?
Mhm.
And and for you to kind of have the presence and the drive to continue on, right? In this new sort of venture with Catalyst Leadership Management, with your book, with your speaking, it's pretty brave. I think it's brave. I think it's wonderful. And,
Well,
and thank you for doing that and imparting upon others what you have learned,
yeah,
right?
a couple of my friends, say I'm just continuing to trailblaze.
Lovely. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
one of I recently I was interviewed for the article, but I didn't know how it was going to play out, and I
Yeah.
was blown away when the article came out. It was a militaryspouse.com article, and when it came out, I think it came out in June, maybe early July, and it was billed as the woman who refused to be invisible.
I love it.
And so that was really, that meant a lot to me because it is the story of who I am.
Right. Yeah. You refuse to be invisible. I
I
love that.
refuse to be invisible. Which
Before we let you go, Cheri, you mentioned, you speak to a lot of students and you talk about, secret ingredients and these types of things. I'm curious because we do have a lot of young people that listen to this show. Most of them are trying to determine whether or not they want to go full-fledged into the world of entrepreneurship. But let's pretend for a minute that what they're actually doing is trying to figure out what company they want to work for.
Mhm.
What are some of the sort of, things you tell them, whether good or bad? Like, because look, when you're deciding whether or not you want to work for someone, you just don't know the whole story until you get in there, right? Just like they don't know the whole story about you when they're looking to hire you. And it's dating,
Mhm.
right? For lack of
It
a better
is.
word. It
It's
is dating.
dating.
So maybe, and in dating we talk about red flags, right?
Yeah.
So what are and when you do these leadership conversations to students, what are some of the, I guess, red flags you tell them to look out for, Cheri?
Well, I think the first red flag I tell them to look out for, often when you apply for a position, first of all, the first red flag is how hard is their application?
Yeah.
How deep and involved in it is it? I mean, the federal government is a pain in the butt. Okay, and
Sure.
most people are going to walk away. They shouldn't. They should hang in there and go through it. But it's that's something to look at, is
Mhm.
how much time is it going to take and effort for that, right? And most companies these days do have shorter processes, right? But that is something to be, I think it's not necessarily, it can be a red flag, but it not necessarily is a red flag. It could be just the company is very particular about kind of
Mhm.
what they're looking for, right?
Right.
And that's good and bad.
Sure.
So, but I do know with the federal government in particular, it's frustrating because it
Mm.
is a process.
Right.
But the second thing, and probably the more of what really is a red flag, is when you get to the interview process. So often in the interview process, you will get called by a HR person, human resources person, and that's usually a screening call
Pre-screen. Yep. Yep.
or to set up the interview, right? But here's what often happens in organizations that I call a red flag. The HR person does the interview. Now, it's different if that's a screening interview and there's another interview to
Coming.
follow,
Right.
right? But they should tell you that, right? And I think if you're only seeing an HR person and it doesn't appear like anybody else has kind of weighed in on your resume or anything like that, that's concerning.
Sure.
Because, and especially if you're interviewing with just an HR person and you don't see anybody else, what's that company going to be like to work with
Right.
if their very introduction to you is HR?
Right.
Who are you going to be dealing with?
Hmm.
Right. And I say this from experience in the federal government, right?
Right.
One of the things that the organization, the board did and VA does, is many times they'll send HR to first, first do the screening, but even after the employee comes on board,
Right.
they're dealing with
Your first
HR,
interaction. Yep.
right? And, I used to tell my employees this over and over again. If there is an issue, I need to know about it. I can't fix it if I don't know about it. And
Right.
most of the times, unfortunately, there were some HR issues that did not, that I could have fixed. And
Yes.
so,
If
and
you
I
caught them
lost,
early. Yep.
yeah, and I lost the employee over it, and it
Yep.
was frustrating. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing to look for, because,
That's a great.
you know, and my son went through this process too. I mean, he went when he was looking for his second job after college. He interviewed with several companies, and he got to the point that if it was just an HR person, he wouldn't. He's like, I
Yeah,
don't think
makes
I'm
sense.
interested.
Yeah. No, that's very, very sound advice, Cheri. And I can speak from my own experience there, where to your point, the HR rep is performing the first round interview that the hiring manager really should be doing. And that is a
Yeah,
great tip as a red flag.
yeah. It's
So
different
yeah,
if it's a screening interview
right.
versus,
Yeah,
but
a first round. Yeah.
yeah, but you need to ask that question. Is this a
Sure.
screening interview, or will there be another interview? Or, ask that, because if you're not talking to someone you're going to be at least working in the same environment in, or
Hmm.
the hiring manager or somebody, then that's a problem, because
Yes.
HR can't answer most of the questions for you. They
Right.
they just can't, because most HR in most organizations are either contracted or they're remote. And many employees are remote too, but
Sure.
the culture is still different for HR than it is for everybody else.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So
Cheri,
yeah.
go ahead.
So, and then the second red flag, or third red flag, depending on how you count them, I
Mhm.
think, is look at the company's reputation.
Yeah.
I mean, those organizations that rate companies and talk about that. Look at people on LinkedIn who work there.
Yeah.
Reach out and talk to them, because they will talk to you about what that is.
That's really important too.
And
I feel like sometimes people are only looking at Glassdoor or other places when they have an axe to grind, but there is
mhm,
some value to other, not necessarily always just Glassdoor. And not to throw any shade on Glassdoor, I do think they provide a good service, but I think there are many other places where you can find opportunities. And look, we talked about the circularness at the beginning of the call here, right? We're all pretty well connected, and
yeah,
usually you can find someone who knows someone maybe who can help you to have an
right.
honest conversation about something.
Yeah, and I think that's more important, is to have that conversation with someone who has worked there or is working there,
Mhm.
and or who's close to to find out a little bit about them, because
Right.
that's going to tell you more
Wonderful.
than anything else.
Cheri, thank you for continuing to trailblaze and for continuing to make an impact. And we really appreciate it. I know your clients do. There's a lot that we can gain from your experience. The organization is Catalyst Leadership Management. The book is Dare to Relate. And I knew you did a book tour over the spring. Any book dates coming up this fall yet? Or
I don't have any right now. When I speak, I do bring the book with me, so I
awesome.
usually have extra books with me, and of course, it's available on both Amazon and Barnes and Noble. The audiobook will be coming out probably in late September. We're finishing that up
Oh,
now.
exciting. Oh, that's very exciting. Awesome.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, so there's so there might be some additional book events in the future.
very
We'll
exciting. Very
see.
good.
It's just depends on what the interest there is. So
Very nice. Very impressive. Dare to Relate is the book once again. Cheri, good luck today. It doesn't sound like you're going to need it, but good luck today with your speaking engagement. And once again, thank you for being here with us.
thank you, Richard. This has been a great conversation. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Bye now.